So it was the summer of 2012. I had reviews.com, which was an extremely premium domain name. I had a proven acquisition strategy in SEO. I had a proven business model in lead generation. I had some office space that I was sharing with another company. I had about $1 million or so in capital to build a team and to start getting this thing going. Now, my job was to figure out how to get reviews.com to rank in Google for basically every single best and reviews query that's out there across as many verticals as possible. Now, up until this point, I had done some things. I built a small content marketing agency, built a handful of revenue generating websites. This was different. At 24 years old, I was now dealing with investors, reporting to a board, and trying to grow a company to be worth at least $100 million for a successful exit. I had no clue what I was doing. Now, the first big decision that I had to make was around the product strategy. What would reviews.com actually be? We knew it was going to be a website that ranked in Google, but that was about it. Everything else was basically unknown, and it was just a blank slate. Now, the big debate was between data/tech approach versus more of a content editorial approach. Most of the competition was taking more of a data-heavy approach to tackle the reviews problem. Lots of side-by-side comparisons of features and data was pretty much the standard. But I was a fan of editorial. Useful reviews require context and explanation. What better way to do that than with editorial? Plus, I had no technical background at all. I did have a strong content editorial background, however, but I still couldn't quite shake the data part. To me, that was really important, and that was key to being unbiased. So I decided that the best approach was to actually blend the two together, take more of a data-centric approach to the editorial. I spent most of my time obsessing over the perfect review. I dissected every single respected editorial review that I could find on the internet. I wanted to answer the big question, what does the ultimate review look like? And this is probably the first time I learned one of the most important lessons in building and growing businesses. And that is just ship it. It was always tempting to spend more time trying to figure out the ultimate review. That's the fun stuff. The only way to really figure that out was to start shipping reviews. We had to do the work. We had to start somewhere. It's never gonna be what we viewed as good enough. That only happens over a long period of time through continuous improvement. So while it wasn't the perfect review, we ended up launching the first version of reviews.com in late 2012. And that was just a few months after getting started. At this point, we had a team of maybe 4 or 5 at most. Now, another big decision that we had to make early on was where to start. Since reviews.com is such a broad name, we could have gone a dozen different directions, like reviews of what? Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. Where we started was actually irrelevant. It didn't matter at all. All that mattered was that we just got started. We hung on tight to that just ship it mantra, and it didn't take long before we made our first dollar. As we entered into the second year, things were progressing really well. We launched somewhere around 10 new verticals per month at that point. The content was pretty good, and we got very efficient utilizing contractors, freelance writers, and all of those types of people to do the majority of the work. So our costs were relatively low, and our fixed costs were very limited. I continued to obsess over creating the perfect review, and we would tweak and make consistent improvements with each new launch. I recall that first dollar, logging into the affiliate networks to see news sales every 2 hours. Of course, most of the time there wasn't news sales, but that didn't stop me from checking it every 2 hours. There's nothing like that first month or two of making money, even when the money is completely non-material. That high just kind of kept us going for a while. But it didn't take long before I felt us starting to hit that ceiling. My investors and partners were all hardcore SEO guys. Like if you're not familiar with SEO, the most critical ranking factor has always been backlinks, which is basically just other established websites linking and mentioning your website in specific pages and specific contexts. And it's pretty much the most important aspect of SEO. Now, link building is super hard and it's not fun at all. Like it's a total grind. And especially when comparing to obsessing over the perfect review or figuring out the reviews.com product, monetization, and really any other aspect of the business. It didn't take long before my investors and partners were asking about links. Hey, Corey, this is great progress. But what about the links? As much as I wanted to continue to push the link building to the back burner, I knew that it was the absolute most important thing to solve in the business at that time to take it to the next level. So I shifted my obsession from figuring out the perfect review to links. I personally designed our next version of reviews.com, and every detail had links in mind. I wanted to design a website that felt super authoritative and link worthy. Basically, kind of a Wikipedia type of feel, the opposite of a modern techie commercial type of website, because my theory was that it would be more linkable. We built our first outreach team in the Philippines, and my head of operations was on the ground floor there every couple of months. She would go over there for weeks at a time. This team was completely dedicated to building links. That's all they did. We started to create content that had a lot of linking audiences baked into it, so our whole content strategy put links first. Pretty much our whole entire strategy in general at this time put the focus around link acquisition. Within 6 months, we were building an average of 500 links per month every single month. And if you fast forward another 6 months, we were doing a couple $100,000 per month in revenue. This was a very direct correlation, revenue from links. Sure, there were other components that went into it, but if I had to give one activity all the credit, without a doubt, it's the work we did on link building side. And that was the reason we won. It was hard, dirty work nobody wanted to do. Our willingness to go where nobody else wanted to go was our competitive advantage. So by the end of 2013, heading into 2014, the vision of creating a destination for reviews with reviews.com was beginning to take a back seat. We'd gotten so good at the hardcore SEO and lead generation stuff that it made sense to just simply do more of that. We acquired a website called thesimpledollar.com for somewhere around $700,000. At the time, it was a well-known personal finance blog with lots of followers, lots of subscribers, and lots of monthly readers. But it wasn't generating hardly any revenue at all. Now, we thought we could apply our playbook to the website and compete in the finance space. Credit cards, insurance, loans, things like that. We already had some exposure in these categories from reviews.com, so we knew there was a huge opportunity here. 6 months later, we were clearing $250,000 in affiliate revenue every single month. The compounding growth of reviews.com and thesimpledollar.com had us flying high. We were a young, scrappy, and small team with less than 10 employees. And we were incredibly profitable. I didn't totally realize it then, but this was right about where our investors started to clearly see the dollar signs running through their minds. It was time to start planning for a future exit. And although we had always agreed on selling eventually, that was the entire point, after all, of what we were doing. For me, it was extremely far from my mind. I never thought about it at all. In my head anyway, my job was just to build and grow the company. I figured the rest would just sort of happen and sort itself out. I was wrong. This was really where my inexperience started to hurt me, and where my investors had to whip me into shape. I had to learn about this thing called optics. Now, how certain things look to an investor matter. How certain things look to a potential acquirer matters even more. It's not just about the numeric performance of the business. There's more to it than that. I was getting tons of pressure to hire, even when it made no sense to me. It made sense from an optics standpoint. After all, nobody's paying 10x EBITDA for a couple of websites. There needs to be an all-star team as well. And my small 8-person team of 20-something scrappers wasn't gonna cut it. We needed to bring in some heavier hitters with some nice looking resumes because optics. We also figured we needed a cool office space. So we found some space in the center of downtown Seattle, and we would make this our home for the next couple of years. In the next year or so, we would go from 9 or so people to 30 plus, with more plans to continue hiring from there. Some of the hires were completely pointless and honestly terrible decisions. Most of them were important roles, and we did build a very respectable team. During this phase, I shifted my obsession once again, this time to recruiting and hiring. I built out a recruiting team and started conducting multiple interviews every day. Now we're in the spring of 2016. Everything's going pretty well. At this point, we're mostly heads down and things are finally somewhat boring, in a good way. Then I got the call. The chairman of my board wanted to talk to me about potentially selling the company. This was a major curveball. And there was a big player in the finance space that was interested in acquiring the Simple Dollar specifically. But since we were structured as a centralized team working across all the sites, this wasn't really an option. So now we're talking about selling the entire company. Like I said, this was a huge surprise to me, and I was mostly resistant to the idea. I felt we were just getting started, and I thought we had at least 2 to 3x growth baked in for the next year. Like, we've been doing so much work in the last 6+ months, and none of that materialized into growth yet. Now, I eventually came to the conclusion that this is probably the right thing for our investors. And that was my number one priority. When you take on investors, your job instantly becomes to serve them and do what is best for them, regardless of what you want. It would also turn out to matter a lot that I wholeheartedly believed in the future growth of the business, and I believed we were stupid for selling it. That belief and passion would come out in all of my meetings, interviews, and dinners with the companies that were interested in acquiring us. So from the start of the acquisition talks all the way until we closed, I basically stopped all of my work. It didn't make sense to continue making major hires or launching new special projects while we were in the middle of acquisition talks. This was another major challenge in this entire process because I liked doing important work. That all got put on pause for quite a long time. Now, as we continued the acquisition talks, more buyers started coming to the table. We had relationships with a lot of them, but the primary one that we were really friendly with over the years was Red Ventures. They would ultimately end up stepping in and moving very quickly to close a deal by the end of October of that year, just 3 months after the first meeting. They paid all cash and they moved fast. This was a really cool experience. Honestly, most of it was just a giant blur and pretty surreal. From the insane indoor basketball court and gym, to the spectacular offices and full City Lake campus, to the celeb-esque CEO who has accomplished more in business already than most could ever dream of in multiple lifetimes. There were a number of reasons why Red Ventures wanted to acquire my company. But still to this day, what stands out to me the most is the fact that we essentially doubled the business within 7 to 8 months of the acquisition. As much as I expected that to be because of all the work we put in to grow the traffic, that wasn't actually the reason it happened. Red Ventures had such incredible monetization capabilities that those alone were the cause of that growth. And that's something worth taking note of. Sometimes the right partner can be very strategic to the business. Eventually, the majority of our company just simply integrated into Red Ventures. Though that wasn't the plan, that's kind of how things worked out. And one of our first orders of business was a company trip to Cancun. And then there were several trips to Vegas that year for amazing dinners, conferences, things like that. Our team continued to grow and adopt that Red Ventures way of operating. As an entrepreneur, being under a larger company like Red Ventures didn't end up being a great fit for me personally. I stayed on for about a year, then I moved on to start building my next thing. At the time of leaving the company, Soda was worth well into the 9-figure range. Now, as I think back on this journey, there's a number of interesting insights and takeaways that come to mind. There's a big one I want to stop and highlight here right now. The goal of Soda was always to get to the 9-figure range in terms of valuation, and then to sell. We raised money from investors, which was possible through articulating a clear vision and strategy. And while we did end up reaching our goal and had a very successful exit, the path to get there wasn't anything close to what we expected. It definitely wasn't the original vision and strategy that we had pitched. It was a wild ride with all sorts of twists and turns. The reason it worked out was because we really did have a very consistent bias towards action. We put our focus on shipping content and then shipping links and then shipping job offers to ultimately fill critical roles and round out the optics of our organization. Wherever you're at right now in your journey, just remember to keep moving. Just ship. I hope you enjoyed my story. That's the fast version, and I have a lot more to share. If you found this interesting or valuable, please subscribe, comment, and share. Let me know what you thought, or if you have any specific questions about how I built a 9-figure digital media company.